Welcome back to Believers IAS Academy. In today's topic of the day discussion, we will be discussing the very important topic which is concerned with respect to the forest conservation of the country, and accordingly we will be discussing the recent report, the Forest Declaration Assessment Report 2024, which tries to shell out or give a very hard truth about the world, stating that the entire world is still far beyond or far behind reaching its target of reducing deforestation or completely cutting down or end to put an end to the deforestation by 2030. And the reports gives a very alarming figure stating that we are far behind the target that we are supposed to achieve. So this particular video is to understand what the report has to tell about the world forest conservation. We will also see pretty much in terms of India's perspective as well, right? And also we will understand why the world is off track right now to end the deforestation by 2030. So let's begin the class. So what is deforestation to begin with? So deforestation means, in simple terms, it is the cutting down of trees, right, or destroying the forest. There are n number of definitions to tell what deforestation is. Now if you also think what are the demerits or what are the causes of deforestation, one is mostly you can think of the commercial use of the forest land for agriculture, even for industries, for mining as well. Correct. Agriculture can be both for commercial use and for also for the personal use, right? And also another major cause of deforestation, also it could be due to natural calamities. Correct. Example, forest fires, which pretty much was rampant in the last few years. Correct. So that is also one of the reason. And another is the man-made. Okay, it is part and parcel of both natural and also commercial, right? So these are the causes of deforestation. So now, why deforestation happens? Because ultimately to utilize the forest for something to produce or to satisfy a short-term need. Because nowhere in the country or around the world deforestation is happening thinking that it would give us a long-term benefit. Nowhere, right? All that is happening around the world in the name of felling down trees or in the name of destroying forest is all for the short-term benefit. Because ultimately when you spoil the forest, when you destruct the trees, you are inviting a long-term issue or inviting a long-term danger, which is climate change. The biggest problem of the present generation is how to tackle or how to encounter climate change, right? So this is pretty much the overview of what deforestation is, and let's say what is the importance of making sure that forests are not put at risk, correct, for our own short-term benefits. Because if you see agriculture, mining, industries, correct, even let's say anything for that matter, why the forests are being destroyed, if you see, it is all for the short-term incentives of the people, correct? But on the long term, it is taking a huge toll on the entire ecosystem. All the free resources that the ecosystem guarantees us, like for example, rainfall, correct? And even the forest cover acts as the huge carbon sink. So the forest is doing this work free of cost, right? Free of cost, the forests are acting as carbon sink, which absorbs huge amount of carbon dioxide present in the air, right? So now, destroying forest, we are also destroying our long-term benefits, or also we can say that we are inviting long-term evils to our own livelihood or our own ecosystem, correct? So now, let's dive into the nitty-gritties of what the report has to say. So even before that, we will try and understand about the report as to who releases it. It is released by the Forest Declaration Assessment. It is an intergovernmental or independent agency which releases report every year, and it is the main objective of the FDA or the Forest Declaration Assessment is to track the global progress on how the countries are taking initiatives to avoid or to reduce deforestation by 2030 in lines with the New York Declaration of Forest Conservation, right? So that is the main agenda of this FDA. And what are the main findings of this report 2025? That it clearly states that world is pretty much going off track in terms of curbing deforestation or trying to put an end to deforestation, and it is continuing. The deforestation is continuing at an alarming rate, correct? And this is not just the only assessment that is talking about the deforestation of the world, but we also recently came across another report, Global Forest Watch, which is released by a US agency, right? So even that clearly states that more than 50% of the deforestation, or let's say, more than 18,000 million hectares of forests were lost just in the year 2024, which is double of what we had seen a huge loss in 2023. So this is also one of the important report. Please go do check what that report has to tell about the forest or let's say deforestation, correct? So now let's move on to the exact details of what deforestation related findings that this FDA report has to tell. First is, it talks about how much of the forest that we have lost. It says 8.1 million hectares of forest lost just in the year 2024, which is very alarming, correct? 8.1 million hectares of forest loss. Because if we see, is the government or we individuals, are we contributing anything to offset this huge loss? Are we doing anything sustainable, correct? Are we doing anything more valuable or that adds value to this ecosystem, where when we are utilizing 8.1 million hectares of the forest land for our own purpose, for our own short-term uses or incentive that we want to get, is the world contributing anything to offset this loss, right? So hence no. So obviously this is very alarming, right? And this particular rise of the deforestation land, or let's say 8.1 million hectares of land which the forest loss that we have seen in the year 2024 is 63% higher than the actual rate which is required for the world to maintain its net zero deforestation by 2030, which means we have pretty much crossed the limit. We are pretty much overboard in terms of how we are exploiting forests, because what is actually required, the rate at which by 2030 we can achieve zero deforestation, the world presently is 63% more than that, right? The deforestation activities are 63% more than what it is actually required to achieve net zero deforestation by 2030, correct? So that is obviously a very alarming, and the report primarily identifies the major cause of this is because of the financial flows mismanagement or the misaligned financial flows in various sectors or in various aspects. First and foremost thing it highlights is the mismatch or the distortion that we can see in terms of how subsidies are provided for the harmful activities as compared to any activity which is sustainable. It says harmful subsidies is greater than green subsidies by what? 200:1 ratio, which means for every 1 rupee is invested on forest friendly activities, right, by providing green subsidies, 200 rupees is being given to harmful activities which is actually affecting the forest, right? So this is the huge stark let's say distortion that we can see in terms of how the subsidies are being produced and how the subsidies are being distributed. So now, who gives the subsidies? It's the government, correct? It's not that the individuals decide where the subsidy should go. It's the government with the funds that they get, the public fund, right? It is part of their budget that they release and it is part of their government expenditure where they decide where the subsidies should go, correct? So now, harmful subsidies, does it mean we are only talking about illegal mining or illegal construction or industrial activities? No, it can also be possible because of giving more subsidies to the agricultural products also, right? Because now more I mean, of course, this is a thing that we will discuss later, but since we are discussing about harmful subsidies, doesn't essentially means that these subsidies are going only for those illegal activities, correct? Because government per se, according to the notification of any subsidies that the government provide, nowhere it mentions that we will provide such subsidies for harmful activities, correct? It is about the end usage of that particular product. Like for example, subsidies are given to the agriculture, like for the farmers, right, to produce certain fruits, or let's say for horticulture for that matter. So now it is very promising when you given the subsidies from the government, it becomes even more easier to kind of set up or even to start agriculture, start your horticulture business that way, correct? So now obviously if anybody doesn't have a land, or let's say even a particular person has a land, but since maybe he got it from his grandfather, and let's say he is in a corporate setup, probably he's a mechanical engineer, or probably he's a computer science engineer working elsewhere in a metropolitan city, but now he learned about the subsidies being given by the government, correct? So that grandfather land, which earlier was there in his village, probably had forest, right? Probably had a lot of trees, lot of vegetation, right? Probably an ecosystem was created there, biodiversity was created there, right? So now because he learned about the subsidy, because he thinks horticulture is profitable, now the immediate thing he'll first do is clear the land, correct? Clear the land. Either he'll start cultivating, he'll start growing, or probably he can even give that land on lease for someone who wants to cultivate. So on one side, we can see that of course the agriculture production is increasing, but on the other side it is also decreasing or depleting the forest cover, correct? Because see, for all the trees that were cut down, right, is there any compensation happening from that particular individual? Now imagine this happening from, let's say, hundreds of the people all together, correct? So that is what is leading to the deforestation, and that's what the harmful subsidies here mean. Okay, so that difference is very important to understand. Anyway, let's move forward. What are the main causes of the deforestation? So now there are three different causes. One is the permanent agriculture, as we discussed, mining, environmental. But broadly, if we have to categorize, there are two things. Okay, one is the economic reasons, and another one is the criminal reasons or the criminal issues which contribute for deforestation. So now, what are the economic issues or economic reasons that contribute for deforestation? One is agriculture, profit making, right? Because now people prefer growing palm oil, soybean, correct? Let's say any fancy fruit, like let's say fashion fruit, or let's say dragon fruit cultivation, right, in place of keeping the forest that way. So one is economic motive, right, the profit making, correct? Then next is export revenue, because now that you started cultivating dragon fruit, which is of utmost demand, let's say in USA, now obviously you will try to export this to USA also, right, to the USA's market, and you're earning that export revenue. So this particular export revenue business model, it also includes what? Deforestation, correct? And now talking about all the criminal issues, the major thing is illegal logging, because more than 60 to 90% of the logging happening in the tropics and the subtropics, right, are all illegal, correct? Using the timber, right? And even the huge amount of money laundering that happens or that is associated with the timber is also another important major reason why the deforestation is happening. So now we understood the broad category. Now to go even more further in detail, one is the permanent agriculture, which contributes to 86%. This is what we discussed. People will prefer growing oil palm, cocoa, nuts, rubber, orchards, pasture, and even seasonal crops, and even cattle ranching, correct? Even for cattle ranching, or maybe you want to open a stud farm of horses, correct? You need a huge area, right? And now that huge area, if it is being converted from a forest land, obviously you're in a way leading for deforestation, correct? So one is the primary agriculture, the permanent agriculture. Next is mining, because 77% of the global mines lie within just 50 kilometers of the vicinity of the key biodiversity area. So this has an indirect effect on the key biodiversity regions, the areas also, right? And third is the environmental crimes, right? Thus we discussed the illegal logging for timber and deforestation, which generates a huge $281 billion of money every year, right? Which is a corrupt money, right? Which also directly goes to the system in terms of money laundering, right? All of this is pretty much interconnected. So deforestation, another important angle is money laundering as well, right? The corruption, the money laundering, the illegal logging, right? So these are all the main causes of deforestation. Now, what is the ultimate necessary thing to do? What is the way forward if we have to think? First is to bring more regulations which are mandatory on both the part, especially on the individual part and even on the government's part also, because in terms of giving subsidies, there has to be a proper delineation for the government to decide or to put a cap on certain sectors, for example, horticulture, for, let's say for that matter, even fisheries for that matter, right? And let's say the fund that the government has, they can pretty much diversify it and also probably can incentivize those farmers who tried to save the forest cover, or tried to save the forest land. Or let's say a regulation must also be put, probably a new regulation where it can say that if this is the entire land of the particular person, let's say 40% of the forest, which includes all those main trees, right? Because in the forest ecosystem, there are few major main trees, we call them mother trees, right? So they nurture the other trees around the area, right? So the actions or regulations must be brought to identify those trees, so that these trees can be left alone, so that will somehow try and maintain the remaining 40% of the forest cover, and probably with the remaining 60% they can further get into the agricultural practice. So this is one of the example, but yeah, mandatory regulations like this over voluntary pledges, correct? So that is also important, because voluntary pledges, usually everybody promises that they will definitely oath to protect the forest, to save, or let's say to plant a tree every year. But how many of us honestly plant, or let's say water or nurture that particular plant, right? So hence, mandatory regulations are very important from the government who can actually control. Then valuing forests, right? It includes the real costs of degradation in the market prices. Means, what are the real costs of degradation? Because there are indirect effects of the deforestation. One is soil degradation, correct? The leaching that goes, and even the huge carbon sink that the world is losing out, right? So this cost is not getting included, correct? So valuing forest means we have to find a measure to value forest by including these real costs of degradation, which usually gets neglected, correct? So that is also one of the biggest way forward, and the most let's say a very fancy way forward, I can call it. Then is the inclusive decision making, where you can empower the indigenous peoples also, and also the local communities and the women, who can take active participation in giving their views about how forest or let's say deforestation can be controlled, right? Because indigenous people, they are mostly the ones who pretty much stay connected with the forest, so they know better than what a few governments or let's say a few high officials do not know. So probably having them over, right, is very important in the decision making processes. So now, apart from that, there are few global restoration goals also, which is also very important. Let's briefly understand it. One is the Bonn challenge, where by 2020 there was a target that it had set that by 2020 the world will see a restoration of 150 million hectares of forest cover. Then in 2030 it was another target which it was which it has still put on itself, that is 350 million hectare target by 2030 restoration. And part of the challenge which India accepted, India is planning to restore 26 million hectare by 2030. So now it is your responsibility to leave in the comment section as to where India stands right now with respect to achieving this particular target, right? And another one is the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was released in 2022, where it talks about restoring 30% of the degraded ecosystems, mostly in the land, water and marine by 2030. So of course, all these important keywords play a tremendous role in enhancing your answers in your mains and even as well your essays, right? if you were to write about forest conservation, correct? So this is very important to keep in mind. Please make sure you make a note of all of this, right? So now, what is the way forward? Shift from promises to enforcement, redirect financial incentives to green initiatives. Now, prioritize sustainable agriculture and mining regulations, because see, bringing sustainability or using this particular word sustainable is pretty much the way forward for almost anything you write with respect to forest, right? Because this is the only possible way to think sustainably, to bring sustainable actions, and also to work sustainably going forward, correct? And now, at the end, support community-led conservation, where we can pretty much include the forest dwellers, correct? Also all the indigenous people, especially the scheduled tribes, correct? So that is also one of the important aspect. So that's all for this particular video. In the end, it is important to understand that deforestation is not just about losing trees. It's about losing the balance of the entire ecosystem on which we are probably riding on a unicycle. Probably we are riding on a single-wheeled bicycle, which in itself is very difficult. Plus, we are balancing on a thin rope, correct? So this is how important deforestation or addressing deforestation means to this particular world, right? Ending deforestation requires a collective global action, because deforestation is not just the problem of India or USA or Africa, right? Because whatever happens as a whole with respect to forest, right, the effects that it is going to leave or it is going to invite is going to affect everyone equitably, be it climate change, be it loss of rainfall, be it harsh climatic conditions like tsunamis, or let's say even anything you think of, correct? Deforestation affects equitably. That is also one thing to keep in mind. So hence, a collective global action is important, and this can also be possible by empowering locals also, and also at the end of the day making sure everything is sustainable, even the financing, right? So this is all for this particular video. I hope it is clear about what deforestation and the effects of deforestation. I pretty well have understood where we currently stand in terms of achieving the target. So before we end the video, let's see what the prelims question is. Consider the following statements regarding global and India's forest restoration efforts. The FDA 2025 report stated that the world is currently on track to achieve zero deforestation by 2030. Permanent agriculture is identified as the leading cause of global deforestation. India has pledged to restore 26 million hectares of degraded and deforested land by 2030 under the Bonn Challenge. Which of the statements given are correct? Use the comment section, use your common sense as well, leave your answers in the comment section. Anyway, that's all for this particular video. Signing off, this is Madan Gopal. Have a beautiful day.